Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to the Police Accountability Report. As I never get tired of saying, this show has a single purpose, holding the politically powerful institution of policing accountable. And in light of the unfolding crisis of the novel coronavirus pandemic, this objective has never been more important. But before we get started, I want you to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct, please email it to us privately at par@therealnews.com. And please like and share and comment on our video. You know I read your comments and appreciate them. So think about it. It's becoming clearer by the day that the U.S. is unprepared to fight this already deadly virus. Daily, we receive reports of doctors without proper equipment, hospital beds in short supply, and testing almost non-existent. But meanwhile, the U.S., over the past 40 years, has assembled one of the largest law enforcement industrial complexes in the history of civilization. The millions of police officers and the endless palisade of jails now consumes $160 billion a year in public money. Which begs the question, what if we spent this largesse on health preparedness? What if we had allocated these communal resources to preparing for a crisis medical health experts said was inevitable? Or hey, what if we had simply spent it on education and medical research? Maybe we'd be ahead of the curve on taming what is now an existential threat for our country. But we didn't. We spent it in part on cops. And so now we have armored carriers, SWAT teams in rural communities, and police officers driving around in brand new SUVs, all but useless to our current dilemma. But as of today, tens of millions of Americans do not even have the ability to see a doctor. Amid what is nothing short of a national medical emergency, people who may be sick with a deadly virus have no assurance, zero, that their medical bills will be paid. And what's even more remarkable, our city, Baltimore, with one of the most corrupt and dysfunctional police departments, guarantees lifetime health coverage for cops. And our city is not alone. Almost every city across the country has the same benefit. That means when an officer retires, the city will pay his or her medical expenses until they die. But do the people have the same protections? Absolutely not. And so you can see why we do this show. The aforementioned emphasis on policing is in fact the crux of the problem. Our disproportionate emphasis on punishment is costing us again and will continue to do so unless we fundamentally change how this country thinks about it. One development that proves how much of our police infrastructure is useless is the nationwide decision to stop arresting people for minor crimes. Our own prosecutor, Marilyn Mosby, announced that last week she would not prosecute and release anyone charged with minor crimes like drug possession and prostitution. Her moves have been duplicated by other cities like New York and Los Angeles. But what this trend exposes is just how much of the policing we pay hundreds of millions of dollars to execute is simply unnecessary. How many of these so-called crimes are simply medical or psychiatric issues that can best be solved with more constructive strategies like addiction treatment or mental health care? And it's not like we weren't warned. This show has spent a great deal of time talking to auditors, people across the country who audit police powers for abuse and malfeasance, civic activists whose efforts are often met with arrests and threats. And what they revealed, I think it's safe to say, is excess. That is how over-policed, over-incarcerated America really is, and how stubborn and invasive law enforcement, when unchecked, can become. And even as the country scrambles for ventilators and takes desperate measures to address the onslaught of a pandemic, law enforcement soldiers on. To talk about this, I'm joined by two people. My reporting partner, Stephen Janis, and police accountability activist and auditor, James Freeman.
Thank you for having me.
Tay, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So Stephen, first to you. You're standing in front of our city's jail, which is actually open, but you also have news on the efforts by the Justice Department to actually dismantle some of our civil rights. Can you talk about that?
Well, this is in front of what's known as central booking in Baltimore City, which is built to process 40,000 people a year. And we still see activity here. Unfortunately, our city, despite the pleas from our state's attorney, Marilyn Mosby, is still arresting people and still incarcerating people. And, you know, as we can see standing outside here, people are still going in. But what's really critical about this, and how this relates to what's going on the national level, is that the Department of Justice under William Barr tried to insert a clause into the recent stimulus package that would allow the Department of Justice to actually suspend habeas habeas corpus, which of course is a right to produce yourself in front of a judge after you've been incarcerated. In other words, you can't just put someone in jail and disappear them because they have a right of habeas corpus to see a judge. And so basically it shows in what a fraught period of history we are in terms of criminal justice, because as the country is trying to put together, or as political leaders are trying to put together a stimulus package that would save us from what could be a depression, the Justice Department is trying to get rid of one of our basic fundamental constitutional rights. The right of habeas corpus is essential to keeping you and giving you some sort of sense of justice when you're incarcerated. It's kind of a balance between the power of the state to incarcerate you and you to challenge that incarceration.
Now, James, before we discuss the video you shared with us, I want to get your thoughts on the request of the Justice Department to basically suspend habeas corpus. Does this align with your sense of what's already wrong with the country's criminal justice system?
No, this doesn't surprise me at all. They'll continually erode our rights as we allow it to happen. And I don't think that this would have been able to be done a few years ago. They wait for the time when it's just right, when people are willing to accept it, and usually it's out of what they call necessity. So yeah, this doesn't surprise me at all. It seems like a time where people are willing to accept, yes, there's a necessity to erode rights right now.
James, you have a lot of experience holding police accountable, armed with nothing but a camera. Does the idea that people can be detained without trial indefinitely concern you, especially when detaining people for dissent is on the table?
Yes, it definitely concerns me, especially in what I do. I'm very concerned. Actually, myself and my family are taking some pretty drastic steps to try to make sure that we stay safe over the next few weeks to months or whatever. But yeah, it's very concerning. I've told people I go out and I don't really believe that we have rights. I believe that they try to make it look like we do, to try to hold up a facade to keep us happy. And so when I go out and I'm exercising rights, to me, the only reason it works is because I do have a camera. And if they don't pretend that I have rights, the people will realize it. At this point, I'm concerned to go out with a camera because they're not even pretending that I have rights today. And that's very concerning and alarming to me. I mean, I go out and do something that I know is legal and lawful on a regular basis. I'm at risk of being arrested and having to go before a judge or a magistrate. And, now I'm in a situation where if I go out and I get arrested, I may not go before a judge or a magistrate. There's nothing. And I feel like it was an illusion of freedom in the first place, but now they're just taking away the illusion. They're not even pretending.
Now, James, I'd like to discuss this video. Where did this happen and when? And what are we actually seeing?
Yes. So, I'm not even entirely sure what happened in that video. And one of the reasons is because this may come as a shock to some people. Government is secretive about what's going on. And getting open records can often take a long time if you ever get them. And so honestly, all I can go off of is some assumptions plus what we physically see, plus the little bits and pieces that I was able to get officers to tell me about. So when we pull up on the scene, at first, we see that there's been an accident in the intersection. We think it's a hit and run because all we see is one damaged vehicle and a whole bunch of police cars. And at first, we didn't realize that it was a police car that was involved in the accident. And we also didn't realize what was going on down the road. We had to put all the pieces together. But what it looked like after it was all put together, and we got a few little pieces of information from police, was it looked like there was a felony stop in a Kia Soul. I don't know what the felony was. I don't know if they just pulled her over for a traffic infraction and ran her and said, oh, this person is a felon or a potential felon or what. For whatever reason, though, it was a felony stop, and so they called for backup. I believe what happened is when backup was coming, code 3, they went through that red light and hit somebody in the intersection. And it ended up being a woman and her 3-year-old child. As we came up, she was sitting on the sidewalk corner, crying, screaming with her baby. I was live streaming, and I've been kind of conflicted a lot recently on whether I record and live stream victims out there. And so I chose not to point the camera at them. When I'm not live, I've got no problem recording everything, and I can edit and blur and do all that stuff later.
So, James, are you saying that this high-speed chase and car accident all happened just to arrest a 5-foot-tall unarmed woman?
Yeah, and then so we watched them uh, hold this woman at gunpoint. Well, we don't even know who or what it is. We hold this vehicle at gunpoint, and when it's all said and done, yeah, this 5-foot something woman looks totally harmless, steps out of the car completely unarmed, and it was just an insane response to us from our perspective, for what appeared to be nothing. And not only that, but they try to pretend that all this is for safety, and how many people did they put at risk? Not only did they have the one wreck, but how many other people were at risk of being in an accident, or being shot? David Boren pointed out that, there was that recent, David Boren was out there with me. He pointed out that there was that recent incident with the UPS hostage where the police just started shooting in all directions and innocent bystanders were hit and killed. And what he was pointing out was that on that stop, there was a woman police officer with her rifle on the sidewalk, on the curb, and her trajectory had her firing into oncoming traffic should something happen. And it seems as if they're never concerned about anything but their own safety, and to hell with public safety.
When you see how law enforcement officers often infringe on people's civil liberties and constitutional rights before we had a pandemic, what do you think we will see now that a national emergency has been declared and we have the potential for the police and National Guard in the streets?
So I don't even want to know what'll come of it. I think we do know, though. I mean, it starts with this thing you're talking about with habeas corpus. I mean, when anybody can be arrested for anything and thrown in jail indefinitely, this is real, and I think that one of the biggest problems is not just the police and the government, but the people's willingness to accept it. If the people weren't willing to accept it, it wouldn't be this way. And what I'm even more concerned about than police and politicians and all of this is the general public. I've made comments about it recently, and I can't tell you how many people have told me, well, James, this is for our safety. And James, so many people are going to die if we don't do this. And to be honest with you, those are the few things that are discouraging to me, but I'm more concerned about the public's acceptance of it than the government's willingness to do it.
James, I don't mean to sound like an alarmist, but couldn't one make the argument that we're seeing the very beginning of martial law?
I've made that argument, and people have told me that I'm stupid, and that's fine. They say, well, martial law is when the military is on the streets governing the people and enforcing whatever rules they see fit. Well, we've already got a militarized police force, okay? So the military's already been on the streets enforcing rules and laws, and even non-existent rules and laws, their own, feelings and emotions. And now we suspend any illusion of any rights. Yeah, that's what I would call martial law. I guess to each their own, you call it what you want, but that's what it looks like to me.
Stephen, we talked about State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby, who got a terse response from the governor on Twitter. What is going on here in this power dynamic between the state's attorney and the governor?
Well, our state's attorney, Marilyn Mosby, who is progressive, has said she's not going to charge people for minor crimes anymore, and has also urged the state, which controls this prison right behind me, to release prisoners who are low-level offenders because of the coronavirus, and the fact that you can't social distance in jail, and the fact that a minor crime basically could be a death sentence. But the governor has not yet taken that up and has been sort of pushing back with her, and it shows an underlying conflict here between, state power and city power. That we've been trying to undo some of the harshest penalties and some of the worst aspects of the criminal justice system, which everyone says is responsible for the inequity you see in the city. And at the same time, in the state level, the governor's been pushing for harsher sentences and just pushed through a package of tough on crime, which is kind of going backwards. So that sort of conflict, you can see that on a national level, and you can see here on the local level, that there are progressive voices that say, hey, this makes no sense to keep people in jail. But then there are people like the Justice Department in our state that say, yeah, keep them locked up or lock up more of them, or worse yet, lock them up without any constitutional rights. Back to you, Taya.
If there's one aspect of this story that parallels our national crisis, it's how much our excessive investment in law enforcement is coming back to haunt us, and how the warnings from a variety of activists about the overemphasis on cops were ignored. Let's revisit an idea I brought up at the beginning of the show and drill down into its implications. There are people right now, citizens of this country, who don't have access to health care. There are people at this very moment who might have the symptoms of the novel coronavirus but are afraid to see a doctor because they don't have the means to pay. Yet meanwhile, a quick survey of police departments across the country makes the converse of this point clear. There are probably few, if any, cops facing the same dilemma. Now let me say this, I don't want police officers to not have health care. That's not the point. But why would our capitalist society offer a benefit to law enforcement that would be cruelly withheld from the rest of us? And why do we have to pay for their benefits when none of us are bestowed the same comfort of guaranteed health care? In our city alone, where schools don't have heat and infrastructure is crumbling, billions have been set aside to pay for these pricey benefits that we as citizens don't have access to. I think this inequity points to a deeper problem, something about the underlying imperative of capitalism mixed with law enforcement that we have to confront now. If this system has produced such an inexplicable imbalance, then isn't that system inherently flawed? Isn't it time to consider rebuilding it from the ground up? Shouldn't we, in the wake of this crisis, examine all the assumptions about crime and the punishment that bolsters it? And most of all, isn't it time to start asking ourselves why it seems that cruelty has become a national addiction, and what can we do to fix it? Well, that's why we produce this show, and that's why it's critically important, even in these difficult times, we will continue to do so. I want to thank my guest, auditor and activist James Freeman, for his time and his insights. Thank you so much, James.
Thank you so much for having me on. I hope to be back.
And I want to thank my co-host Stephen Janis for his invaluable reporting, writing, and research.
Thanks, Taya. We'll keep reporting from out in the field so we make sure that people know what's going on, during this crisis. Thanks for having me.
And of course, I have to thank friend of the show, Noli D, for her help. Thank you, Noli D. And I want you watching to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please share it with us and we might be able to investigate. Please reach out to us. You can email us tips privately at par@therealnews.com and share your evidence of police misconduct. You can also message us at Police Accountability Report on Facebook or Instagram, or at Eyes on Police or Twitter. And of course, you can message me directly at Tejas Baltimore on Twitter or Facebook. And please share, like, and comment. You know I read your comments and suggestions and appreciate them. I'm your host, Taya Graham, and I want to thank you for watching this episode of the Police Accountability Report. Please be safe out there.